60 Minutes Rewind.
This is a story about the cruelest disease you have never heard of. It's called Frontotemporal Dementia, or FTD, and given the devastating toll it takes on its victims and their families, it ought to be much better known than it is. FTD is the #1 form of dementia in Americans under the age of 60. What causes it is unclear, but it attacks the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain which control personality and speech, and it's always fatal. It is not Alzheimer's disease, which degrades the part of the brain responsible for memory. With FTD, people either display such bizarre behavior that their loved ones can hardly recognize them, or they lose the ability to recognize themselves. That's what happened to Tracy Lind one day a few years ago as she was standing in a public restroom.
I was washing my hands and I looked in the mirror and I did not recognize my own face.
Didn't recognize yourself?
No, I looked in the mirror and I kept looking. I remember I kept looking at this woman, wondering who was she?
This is who she was, the Very Reverend Tracy Lind, Dean of the Episcopal Cathedral in Cleveland, Ohio, one of the city's most prominent preachers and civic leaders. She was 61 years old when both she and her spouse, Emily Ingalls, began to notice trouble with things Tracy had always done very well, like finding the right word, recognizing congregants and friends' faces, and, of course, her own.
That's when I said, oh, man, I got to go see a doctor.
When that happened, were you scared?
Oh, I was scared to death.
Emily, what did you think was happening?
I thought there's something not right with her brain.
On Election Day 2016, Tracy Lind got the diagnosis, frontotemporal dementia. She has what's called the speech variant of the disease, which, among other things, attacks the part of the brain where language lives.
Sometimes you're fine and you're on. And then there are other times that the words just don't come out. I mean, even if I know what the word is, sometimes I feel like I'm playing bingo. And when I find the word, I shout it. I feel like an imbecile. You know, apple, oh yeah, apple, that's it. And I get all excited.
This is acutely painful for Tracy because being a powerful, effective speaker has always been at the core of her identity.
One of the first things you did once you got this diagnosis was to resign from your job as dean at Trinity Cathedral. Why did you take that action so quickly?
Mainly I knew I was starting to fail, even though I was faking it pretty well.
Since stepping down, Tracy and Emily have traveled around the country and the world speaking and preaching about her FTD, or as Tracy puts it, telling the story of dementia from the inside out.
I was determined to live what I had been preaching for over 30 years, that out of pain comes joy. I'm gonna face this disease called FTD that I'd never heard of before, and I'm gonna see what I can do with it.
I don't know if you are aware of how unique this situation is, that you are in the middle of this decline from dementia, and yet you're so able to articulate what that's like.
I am aware of that. I think my curiosity is what's getting me through it. Because otherwise, Phil, I'm just going to lay down and roll up in a ball.
Tracy says she has good days and bad days. Just in our interview, there were moments when she was completely in control and moments when she wasn't.
And I'm doing some, you know, I know there's no.
Do you want help?
Can you help, please?
Okay.
This is the way this very sad illness presents.
Dr. Bruce Miller may be the world's leading expert on frontotemporal dementia. He runs a lab at the University of California, San Francisco that's doing cutting-edge research on the two main forms of FTD, the speech variant that Tracy Lind has, and a behavioral variant that attacks personality, judgment, and empathy.
Pleasure to see you both again.
On the day we visited Dr. Miller's clinic, he and his team met with FTD patient Thomas Cox and his wife, Laurie. At first glance, Thomas seems fine, but he's not.
I've got an FTD.
Okay. And has it affected you so far?
No.
In fact, Laurie Cox says that starting a few years ago, Thomas lost interest in her, in their son, and in his work, so much that he was fired from his job. By now, he's pretty much reduced to looking at photos on his phone.
That's Bugatti.
That's our dog.
Your dog.
I can blame the disease. I can say that the disease stole my husband.
Yeah. When a family sees someone with this illness, they don't recognize them. This is not the person I married that I love. This is not my father or my mother.
You have said that FTD attacks people at the very soul of their humanity.
This is profound as anything that can happen to a human being. It robs us of our very essence, of our humanity, of who we are.
Bruce Miller says because so many cases are first misdiagnosed as mental illness, it takes an average of 3 years and several expensive brain scans to get a correct diagnosis of FTD.
So whether it's 20,000 new cases every year, 100,000, 200,000, we still don't know. But in young people with neurodegeneration, frontotemporal dementia is a big one.
So if you see someone who is suffering dementia at a younger age,
very strong likelihood that it's FTD.
Dr. Miller showed us this composite image of two of the major degenerative brain diseases.
Frontotemporal dementia, shown in blue, Alzheimer's disease, shown in red. So very different geography, very different clinical manifestations.
what does the blue indicate?
The blue indicates is that there's loss of tissue. When we see loss of tissue in that brain region, we know people have lost their interest in life, their drive, they do less, they care less about other people.
That loss of empathy, Miller says, can produce dangerous, impulsive, even criminal behavior. And those with behavioral FTD are rarely aware that anything has changed.
He went from being a caring, doting father and husband, and it just seemed like he'd flipped a switch off. And he had no idea that he'd changed. He had no idea.
Amy Johnson and her husband Mark married in 2006, settled in the small Minnesota town of Windham, and now have 4 young children, 3 boys and a girl. 3 years ago, Amy says, Mark suddenly seemed to stop caring about her and the kids.
That's the first time that I really remember thinking to myself, what happened? Where did you go?
Amy recalls a day when she left Mark in charge of their sons, then 3 and 2, only to come home and find the boys playing outside, alone, by a busy street, while Mark sat inside watching TV, oblivious. On other days, he began to display compulsive behavior she had never seen before.
He couldn't stop eating. I started locking the food up. He would walk down to the grocery store and buy more. I took his credit card, he'd walk down to the grocery store and steal food.
I mean, these changes that you saw, did you ask him what's going on?
Yeah, and he just said, oh, I don't think anything's different, is it?
It was. Mark began making inappropriate remarks to a female coworker at the company where he worked as a manufacturing engineer.
He was fired.
Mm-hmm. And his reaction was, oh, well, I guess okay. So what's for supper tonight?
What was your reaction?
I was just devastated. I was 7 months pregnant at the time with our daughter.
With your 4th child?
With my 4th child.
The story will continue after this.
So as this progresses, what's the eventual outcome?
Outcome of this is always death.
Always death.
Always death. We have no way of intervening yet to slow the progression.
As FTD corrodes the brain, it also eventually causes bodily functions to shut down. That's what leads to death. But Bruce Miller is optimistic, pointing to promising research, both in his lab and funded by NIH grants to scientists around the country.
Suddenly we have interventions and research that are going on that give me great hope.
When might you expect a breakthrough?
I'm hoping in the next 5 years that we will have very powerful therapies in certain variants of frontotemporal dementia that may stop it cold.
Tracy Lind and Emily Ingalls have no idea whether any breakthrough will come in time to help them. If not, Tracy will eventually lose the ability to speak at all, and then the ability to swallow.
The not being able to swallow part, that's what's really frightening. So I try to live in the present moment.
I'm not very good at living in the moment, so I worry a lot about the future.
Do you worry about taking care of me?
Yeah, I worry about taking care of you. Sure.
What's going to be the hardest part?
I think the hardest part is going to be the loss of the relationship.
Has Emily told you this before?
No, I don't think so.
As you can see, caregivers suffer as much as patients. For months, Amy Johnson kept Mark at home, even as she mothered 4 small children and held a full-time job. But his symptoms got worse and worse.
When did it become clear to you that you had to put him in a facility?
I went to an appointment with a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and she said, I think it's time for you to look for a different place. Because now when he thinks of something, the part of his brain that tells him that's a bad idea doesn't work anymore.
Mark Johnson now lives in a facility about an hour away from home. He's gained nearly 100 pounds due to compulsive eating, even walking into elderly residents' rooms and taking their food. Amy says his care now costs her nearly $7,000 a month.
Out of pocket?
Out of pocket. He would be devastated to know that that's where his retirement savings are going and that they're not going to his family.
Crippling costs are common for FTD families, and it's often tough to find a facility to care for patients like Mark Johnson. The assisted living industry is not set up for 6'3", 40-year-olds.
How's it going? This is Bill.
How are you? Very nice to meet you.
Amy visits Mark as often as she can and invited us to come along one afternoon. He told us he'd just like to go home.
Do you think you need help?
No.
So do you understand why you're here?
No.
Think you'd be okay at home?
Yeah.
I think Amy thinks, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think she thinks this is the best place for you right now.
Okay.
After another minute, Mark said, "All right, see ya," and we left him.
Big hug.
Okay.
It's clearly painful for Amy to see what FTD has done to her husband and to know what it will do.
They gave him 2 to 5 years to live, and
2 to 5 years.
2 to 5 years.
So how are you doing now?
It depends on the day. I miss him a lot.